Billionaire pretending to be poor was rejected on Christmas blind date until a little girl did this. Caleb Morrison didn't even look up when the chair across from him scraped backward against the tile floor of the restaurant. He was focused on the thin trail of water sliding down the side of his glass, watching it reach the napkin and disappear. Across from him, the woman had already slipped her coat over her shoulders, her movements quick and decided. She wasn't angry, and she wasn't nervous, which somehow made it worse. She had already made her choice before she arrived. "This isn't what I imagined," she said calmly, her voice low but firm enough to end the evening. Caleb felt the familiar urge to explain rise in his chest, then fade just as fast. He'd learned over time that explanations rarely changed first impressions. She glanced once at his jacket, once at the small table, and once at his hands. Then she stood, as if the conversation had never really begun. She didn't wish him a Merry Christmas, or say she was sorry for leaving. Her heels clicked softly as she walked past other tables filled with laughter and clinking glasses. Caleb stayed where he was, his posture still, his face neutral, his eyes following nothing in particular. The decorations above them blinked red and gold, cheerful and completely unaware of him. For a moment, it felt like the entire room was moving while he stayed frozen. If you believe in compassion and the quiet strength of ordinary people, take a moment to like and subscribe. Stories like this remind us how one small act can change everything. The waiter hovered nearby, unsure whether to clear the extra place setting or wait a few more seconds. Caleb gave a small nod, a silent signal that it was fine to take the untouched plate away. Two menus still sat folded neatly at the edge of the table, now pointless. The reservation slip clipped to the stand still showed two names written in pen. Only one of those names was still present. As the waiter stepped back, the front door of the restaurant opened again, letting in a rush of cold December air. Along with it came the sound of a child's laughter, bright and unguarded, cutting through the low hum of conversation. A woman entered, brushing snow from her coat, her attention focused on the little girl beside her. The girl bounced slightly on her feet, excited by the lights, the smells, the noise. Then her gaze drifted toward Caleb's table. She slowed as they passed, her small face turning serious as she noticed the empty chair across from him. Her eyes moved from the abandoned place setting to Caleb's face, lingering longer than most adults ever did. She studied him with the kind of focus only children have, unburdened by assumptions. Then she tugged gently at her mother's hand and whispered something that made the woman stop walking. The mother followed her daughter's gaze and stiffened. Before the woman could speak or pull her back, the girl stepped away and crossed the short distance to Caleb's table. Her sneakers made soft sounds against the floor, unnoticed by anyone else in the room. Caleb felt someone near him and lifted his head, expecting the waiter to return. Instead, he found himself looking at a child standing beside his table, completely unafraid. Her presence caught him off guard in a way the rejection hadn't. She tilted her head slightly, her expression open and genuinely curious, not intrusive or rude. Her voice was clear when she spoke, carrying just enough to reach him without drawing attention. "What happened to the lady who was sitting here with you?" she asked, nodding toward the empty chair. Caleb took a breath, unsure how to answer something so simple and so loaded at the same time. Before he could respond, she added one more question that changed the night. Caleb Morrison had learned how to sit inside silence without panicking, but that night it pressed against him harder than usual. The girl's question lingered in the air, simple and direct, carrying more weight than it should have. He glanced toward her mother, who was already apologizing with her eyes before saying a word. The woman moved closer, her face warm but cautious, clearly aware of how unexpected this was. Caleb straightened slightly, unsure whether to smile or speak first. "I'm sorry," the woman said softly, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder while keeping her voice calm. "She's very observant, and sometimes she forgets that adults don't always like questions." Caleb shook his head gently, letting out a small breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "It's okay," he replied, his voice steady, though his chest felt tight. "She didn't do anything wrong." The girl didn't move away when her mother tried to guide her back. Instead, she stayed where she was, her attention fixed on Caleb like she was waiting for something important. Her mother hesitated, clearly torn between politeness and the instinct to protect her child. The room continued around them, conversations overlapping, plates clinking. holiday music humming softly. Yet for a brief moment, it felt like they were standing in a pocket of quiet. "My name's Hannah," the woman said after a pause, offering a small, careful smile. "And this is Lucy." Lucy waved once, quick and casual, then looked back at Caleb like introductions were already done. Caleb nodded, returning the gesture, feeling strangely grounded by how normal it all felt. "I'm Caleb," he said, keeping it simple. Hannah glanced at the empty chair across from him, then back at her daughter. Lucy followed her gaze and frowned slightly, as if trying to solve a problem only she could see. "She hates when people eat alone," Hannah added, her tone light but sincere. "She thinks it's especially wrong on Christmas." Caleb felt something shift in his chest at that. Lucy tugged on her mother's sleeve again, more insistently this time. Hannah sighed, the kind of sigh that came from long shifts and constant responsibility. "Lucy," she murmured, already knowing what was coming. But Lucy didn't look at her mother when she spoke. She looked directly at Caleb. "There's room at our table," Lucy said, pointing behind her without hesitation. "My mom says sharing makes things better, even if you don't know each other." Hannah opened her mouth, clearly ready to apologize again or pull her daughter away. Caleb glanced once at his untouched plate, then back at the two of them. He felt the weight of the night pressing on him, waiting for his answer. For a second, Caleb considered declining, choosing the familiar comfort of leaving quietly. That was what he usually did when evenings went wrong. But something about Lucy's certainty, about Hannah's tired kindness, made it harder to retreat. He nodded slowly, surprising himself with the ease of it. "All right," he said, and the word felt heavier than it should have. As they walked toward Hannah and Lucy's table, Caleb sensed that something had already changed. Not in a dramatic way, and not in a way he could explain. Just enough to make him aware that the night wasn't finished with him yet. The empty chair behind him no longer felt like the end of something. It felt like the beginning of a question he hadn't planned to ask. Caleb followed Hannah and Lucy to their table, aware of how unusual the situation looked from the outside. A man abandoned on a blind date, now sitting with strangers on Christmas night. But no one around them seemed to notice, and that anonymity felt strangely comforting. Hannah pulled out the chair for Lucy first, a habit formed from years of putting her daughter before herself. Caleb waited until Lucy climbed onto her seat before sitting down. The table was modest, nothing fancy, with a small candle flickering between menus. Hannah apologized again, though her voice carried more exhaustion than embarrassment. Caleb waved it off, telling her honestly that he hadn't planned on leaving just yet anyway. Lucy leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, studying him like she was deciding something important. Her curiosity felt sincere, not invasive. They exchanged simple details, the kind people share when they don't expect anything in return. Hannah mentioned she worked as a nurse at a nearby public hospital, often pulling double shifts during the holidays. Caleb said he worked independently, keeping his explanation vague but truthful enough. Lucy listened closely, interrupting only to comment on the Christmas decorations or the smell of the food. The tension Caleb carried began to loosen without him noticing. When the waiter arrived, Lucy immediately spoke up and asked for an extra plate. Hannah started to object, then stopped herself, watching Caleb instead. He nodded, accepting the offer without hesitation, surprised by how natural it felt. The waiter smiled warmly and added the plate as if this were the most normal thing in the world. That small gesture sealed the moment. As food arrived, Lucy talked about her favorite drawings and the way Christmas felt different every year. Hannah listened with the practiced attention of someone used to long conversations at the end of hard days. Caleb found himself responding more than he usually did, sharing thoughts instead of facts. He laughed once, a quiet sound that surprised him more than anyone else. It had been a while since laughter came without effort. At one point, Lucy asked why the other woman had left so quickly. The question wasn't sharp, just honest, and it landed gently between them. Caleb paused, choosing his words carefully, aware of Hannah watching him closely. "Sometimes people decide before they really listen," he said simply. Lucy nodded, satisfied with the answer. Hannah met Caleb's eyes then, something unspoken passing between them. There was no pity in her expression, only understanding shaped by her own disappointments. She didn't ask more, and that restraint felt like kindness in itself. Caleb realized how rare it was to be around someone who didn't push for explanations. The night felt slower, safer. As the meal continued, Caleb sensed the quiet shift happening inside him. The rejection from earlier no longer sat at the center of his thoughts. In its place was a different awareness, one he hadn't expected, that a single choice, made by a child without calculation, had redirected the evening, and that whatever came next would matter more than the date that never happened. Caleb didn't realize how tense his body had been until he felt his shoulders slowly relax while sitting at Hannah and Lucy's table. The rejection from earlier still existed, but it had been pushed to the background by something quieter and more unsettling. Being welcomed without questions made him aware of how rarely that happened in his life. He listened as Hannah cut Lucy's food into smaller pieces, her movements automatic and careful. There was no performance in her kindness, just habit. Hannah excused herself briefly to speak with the waiter, leaving Caleb alone with Lucy for a moment. Lucy swung her feet slightly beneath the table, humming to herself as she looked around the room. She glanced back at Caleb, noticing the way his hands rested flat against his legs, like he didn't quite know what to do with them. "You don't talk much," she said, not accusing, just observing. Caleb smiled faintly, unsure how to explain something so deeply ingrained. "I talk when I feel useful," he answered after a moment, surprised by his own honesty. Lucy considered that, her brow furrowing in a way that felt far too serious for a 6-year-old. "My mom says people don't have to earn being nice," she replied, as if reciting a rule she lived by. The words landed harder than Caleb expected, stirring something uncomfortable in his chest. He nodded, even though he wasn't sure he believed it yet. When Hannah returned, she noticed the shift immediately. The way Caleb seemed quieter, more inward. She didn't ask what had been said, sensing that some conversations didn't need to be interrupted. Instead, she spoke about her day at the hospital, about patients who had no visitors and rooms that felt too empty. Her voice was steady, but the fatigue underneath it was impossible to miss. Caleb listened closely, recognizing the loneliness she described. As she talked, Caleb became aware of a familiar pressure building inside him. Not the kind tied to money or responsibility, but the deeper weight of wanting to help and not knowing how. He'd spent years solving problems by throwing resources at them, by fixing things efficiently and quietly. But sitting there, he understood that none of that mattered in this moment. All that mattered was staying present. Lucy interrupted her mother mid-sentence to ask if Caleb had family nearby. The question froze him just long enough for Hannah to notice. She shot Lucy a quick look, already ready to apologize again, but Caleb shook his head gently, signaling that it was okay. "No one close," he said, keeping his voice even. The admission settled heavily over the table. Not dramatic, just real. Hannah softened, her expression changing in a way that came from lived experience. She didn't offer sympathy or advice, and that restraint felt intentional. Lucy reached across the table and slid her napkin closer to Caleb, as if sharing something important. The gesture caught him off guard more than words ever could. For the first time that night, Caleb felt exposed in a way money had never protected him from. Not because he was being judged, but because he wasn't. There was nothing to perform, nothing to prove, nothing to hide behind. Just a quiet understanding forming in the space between three people who had no reason to meet. And Caleb sensed that whatever came next would ask more of him than he was used to giving. As plates were cleared and the restaurant grew louder around them, Caleb felt a subtle shift in how Hannah looked at him. It wasn't suspicion or interest, but recognition, like she was beginning to place him somewhere new in her understanding. She asked him what kind of work he did, not out of politeness, but because the silence invited something honest. Caleb hesitated just long enough to reveal that the question mattered. "I build things," he said, choosing his words carefully. "And sometimes I walk away from them." Hannah nodded slowly, absorbing the answer without pressing for details. She spoke instead about how she'd learned to live with unfinished stories of her own. Patience she couldn't save, relationships she couldn't hold together, promises she made when life looked simpler. Her voice didn't crack, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. Caleb realized this wasn't small talk, it was disclosure. Lucy listened quietly, unusually still for her age, sensing the seriousness in the air. She asked whether Caleb missed the things he walked away from. The question was simple, but it cut deeper than anything asked earlier that night. Caleb stared at the candle between them. watching the flame tremble slightly. "Sometimes I miss who I was when I was building them," he admitted. That answer lingered between them, heavy, but not uncomfortable. Hannah didn't rush to fill the space, which made the moment feel safer rather than awkward. She shared that she once dreamed of leaving her job and traveling, before Lucy came along. Her smile was genuine when she said she didn't regret it, even if the path was harder than expected. Caleb felt the honesty settle into him like warmth. The conversation drifted back to lighter topics, but something fundamental had already changed. Caleb was no longer a stranger passing through their evening. He was someone who had been seen, even if only partially. Lucy leaned back in her chair, clearly satisfied, like she'd solved an invisible puzzle. The sense of isolation Caleb carried had begun to loosen its grip. When the check arrived, Caleb reached for it instinctively, then paused. Hannah noticed the movement and gently placed her hand over his. "You don't have to," she said, her tone kind but firm. Caleb looked at her, realizing she wasn't testing him or expecting anything in return. That restraint made the moment heavier, not lighter. "I'd like to," he replied quietly, meeting her gaze. Not because he felt obligated, but because choosing to give felt grounding. Hannah studied his face for a moment, then nodded in acceptance. Lucy smiled like this outcome had been obvious all along. The check was settled, but the exchange was far from over. As they stood to leave, Hannah thanked Caleb for the company, her words sincere and measured. There was no mention of seeing each other again, no exchange of numbers, no expectations set. That absence of pressure felt deliberate, almost protective. Caleb watched them walk toward the door, Lucy waving back at him with both hands, and for the first time that night, he wondered what it would mean to stay present instead of disappearing. Caleb expected the night to end quietly after they parted ways, but the feeling he carried home refused to settle. It stayed with him as he drove through nearly empty streets, Christmas lights blurring past his windshield. He replayed Lucy's certainty, Hannah's calm restraint, and the ease of a conversation without agendas. Back in his apartment, the silence felt heavier than usual, no longer neutral, but unfinished. For the first time in years, he didn't distract himself with work. The following morning, Caleb woke earlier than he needed to, his thoughts already moving. He remembered Hannah mentioning the hospital, the overcrowded rooms, the patients who had no visitors. That detail stuck with him more than the rejection from the blind date ever had. Helping had always been his instinct, but usually from a distance, protected by anonymity and scale. This time, the urge felt personal and immediate. Instead of making calls or delegating tasks, Caleb drove himself to a local store. He walked the aisles slowly, choosing items that felt human rather than impressive. Warm socks, blankets, simple toys, paperback books, things people held onto. He paid in cash, ignoring the looks from the cashier when the total climbed into the thousands of dollars. None of it felt excessive to him. When he arrived at the hospital, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The smell of disinfectant and quiet urgency contrasted sharply with the warmth of the restaurant the night before. Caleb spoke to the front desk, explaining that he wanted to make a donation without publicity or conditions. The staff hesitated, then softened when they realized he wasn't asking for recognition. He asked only that the items reach patients who had no one else. As he waited for approval, Caleb noticed Lucy sitting on a bench near the hallway. Her legs swung back and forth, her jacket zipped up tight, her eyes scanning the room. She spotted him almost immediately, her face lighting up in recognition. "Hey," she said loudly, hopping off the bench and running toward him. Caleb froze, unsure how to react. Hannah followed moments later, concern flashing across her face before easing. She looked from Lucy to Caleb, confusion quickly giving way to understanding. "You came here," she said, not accusing, just surprised. Caleb nodded, suddenly aware of how exposed the moment felt. "I remembered what you said," he replied simply. Lucy grabbed his hand without asking, pulling him toward the waiting area. She showed him drawings taped to the wall, explaining which ones were hers. Caleb listened carefully, kneeling beside her as if this were exactly where he belonged. Hannah watched from a short distance, her expression thoughtful and guarded. Something about this felt too intentional to ignore. When they finally spoke privately, Hannah thanked him but kept her distance. She made it clear she didn't want favors or assumptions attached to kindness. Caleb respected that boundary immediately. telling her he wasn't there for gratitude. "I just didn't want anyone to feel forgotten today," he said. The words surprised him with how true they were. As he left the hospital later that afternoon, Caleb felt the weight of choice pressing on him. This wasn't a one-time gesture, and he knew it. Whatever he'd stepped into now would ask consistency, not money. Driving away, he wondered whether he was ready for that kind of presence, and whether kindness could change someone who had learned to stay distant for so long. Caleb didn't expect to see Hannah again so soon after the hospital, and that surprise caught him unprepared. She stood outside the building when he returned a few days later, her coat pulled tight, Lucy beside her holding a folded piece of paper. There was something different in Hannah's posture, less guarded but more serious. She wasn't there to thank him or confront him, and Caleb sensed that immediately. She was there because something inside her had shifted. Hannah explained that Lucy had insisted on coming back, refusing to let the moment at the hospital stay unfinished. Lucy stepped forward and handed Caleb the folded paper without ceremony. It was a drawing, simple and uneven, showing 3 figures sitting at a table with a star above them. On the back, in careful letters, Lucy had written that no one should be alone when they can sit together. Caleb felt his throat tighten as he held it. He crouched down to Lucy's level, meeting her eyes instead of thanking her quickly and moving on. He told her that the picture mattered more than she probably understood. Lucy listened seriously, nodding like this was important business. Hannah watched the exchange quietly, her arms crossed not in defense but in reflection. She was seeing Caleb differently now, not as a stranger, but as someone present. Hannah admitted that she'd looked him up after the hospital, not out of suspicion, but curiosity. What she found had unsettled her more than she expected. Articles, numbers, headlines that didn't match the man who had sat quietly with her daughter. She didn't accuse him of hiding anything, but she didn't pretend it didn't matter either. The honesty of the moment pressed in on both of them. Caleb listened without interrupting, resisting the urge to explain or justify himself. When she finished, he told her the truth in the simplest way he could manage. He said he'd learned that money made people decide too quickly who he was supposed to be. He said he didn't want that decision made for him again, not by strangers or by himself. Hannah absorbed the answer, weighing it carefully. Lucy looked between them, sensing the tension without understanding its source. She reached for Caleb's hand again, grounding him in the moment. Hannah noticed the gesture and didn't stop it, which felt like permission. There was no romance in the air, only a shared understanding forming slowly. That quiet connection felt heavier than any declaration. Before they parted, Hannah made one thing clear. She wasn't ready for expectations, labels, or promises. Caleb agreed without hesitation, relieved by the boundary. What mattered was showing up honestly, without roles or rewards. As they walked away, Caleb realized this wasn't a turning point because of love, but because of trust. He stood there after they left, Lucy's drawing still in his hands, unsure of what would come next. The connection they'd formed felt fragile, but real. He sensed that whatever followed would test his willingness to stay open, not with grand gestures, but with patience and restraint. And that question stayed with him long after the street emptied again. The weeks that followed unfolded more slowly than Caleb expected, not because nothing was happening, but because everything now required intention. Hannah didn't disappear, but she didn't move closer either, choosing instead a careful distance that protected Lucy and herself. They crossed paths at the hospital occasionally, always brief, always respectful, never awkward. Caleb learned to read the difference between rejection and boundaries, something he hadn't mastered before. That distinction alone forced him to change how he showed up. Hannah's mother entered the story quietly, through concern rather than conflict. After noticing how Lucy talked about Caleb at home, she asked questions that weren't hostile, but practical, shaped by a lifetime of protecting her daughter from disappointment. Who was he? What did he want? And how long did he plan on staying present before vanishing like others had? Hannah struggled to answer because she wasn't sure yet, and that uncertainty unsettled her more than answers ever had. Caleb felt the weight of that doubt without being directly confronted by it. At the same time, pressures from Caleb's own world began to resurface, calling him back toward comfort and distance. Business partners reached out with new opportunities, reminding him how easily he could return to a life where presence wasn't required. The idea of walking away again tempted him, especially when things felt emotionally unclear and unstructured. He realized how often he had chosen movement over staying, change over commitment, absence over vulnerability. That pattern was no longer invisible to him. Lucy, unaware of the adult complexity forming around her, continued to act as the emotional center of gravity. She invited Caleb to school events, showed him drawings, and spoke about him with the assumption of continuity. Hannah noticed how naturally Lucy integrated him into her emotional world, and that frightened her more than comforted her. Letting someone matter meant risking disappointment, and she had learned that lesson the hard way. The conflict was no longer external, but deeply internal. One evening, Hannah finally spoke openly, not in accusation, but in fatigue, admitting that she didn't know how to protect Lucy without isolating her. She explained how kindness often came with expectations she didn't agree to, and how generosity sometimes hid control. Caleb listened carefully, understanding that this was not about him alone, but about patterns Hannah had survived. He didn't promise permanence or reassurance he couldn't guarantee. He promised consistency in the present, which felt harder and more honest. He began noticing how small routines shaped trust, like answering messages when tired or admitting uncertainty instead of offering solutions. Hannah responded to that honesty by relaxing, slowly including him in decisions involving Lucy. Those moments taught Caleb that healing was built through repetition, not intensity, and that showing up imperfectly every time mattered more than getting anything right once. That answer unsettled Hannah, not because it was wrong, but because it required her participation. Consistency meant she couldn't simply wait to be proven wrong or right. It meant engaging, observing, and allowing time to reveal truth. Lucy watched these moments closely, sensing change even when words were measured. The family dynamic was shifting, whether anyone named it or not. External challenges continued to test them, from hospital crises to scheduling conflicts to moments of misunderstanding. None of these were dramatic on their own, but together they created strain that forced growth. Caleb learned when to step forward and when to step back, resisting the urge to solve everything. Hannah learned to articulate boundaries without closing herself off completely. Lucy remained the constant reminder of why presence mattered more than certainty. By the end of that season, nothing had resolved neatly, but something essential had stabilized. There was trust forming, slow and imperfect, built through repeated choices rather than declarations. Caleb understood that this stage was not about arriving, but about staying engaged when clarity was missing. Hannah understood that protection did not always mean distance, and all of them sensed that something meaningful was approaching, even if none of them could yet name it. The turning point didn't arrive with an argument or a confession, but through something quiet that Caleb never expected to receive. It came in the form of an envelope left at the front desk of the hospital, addressed to him in careful handwriting. A nurse handed it to him during one of his visits, mentioning that Lucy had insisted it be given directly to him. Caleb hesitated before opening it, already sensing that whatever was inside would change how he understood everything. He waited until he was alone before unfolding the paper. Inside was a letter written by Hannah, not emotional or dramatic, but steady and deeply honest in a way that surprised him. She explained that Lucy had been talking about that first night almost every day, not about the food or the restaurant, but about the empty chair. Lucy believed that moment mattered more than anything else because it proved people didn't have to disappear when things felt uncomfortable. Hannah admitted she hadn't realized how much that belief had taken root in her daughter until she listened closely. The letter wasn't asking for anything, but it was revealing something important. Hannah wrote about her own childhood, about growing up watching adults leave quietly when life became complicated. She described how she'd learned to survive by lowering expectations and teaching herself not to need too much from anyone. Lucy, she said, had challenged that lesson without even trying, simply by acting on instinct instead of fear. Reading this, Caleb felt a clarity settle in that no amount of success had ever given him. The bond forming between them had never been accidental. The letter continued with a truth Hannah hadn't spoken out loud before, even to herself. She wrote that seeing Caleb remain present without demanding access or control had disrupted her understanding of generosity. She had expected distance to feel safer, but instead it had felt empty, while cautious closeness had felt grounding. That realization unsettled her. but it also offered relief she hadn't known she needed. For the first time in years, she was reconsidering what protection really meant. Lucy's voice appeared again at the bottom of the page, added in uneven letters with help from someone older. She wrote that she liked that Caleb stayed even when things were quiet and confusing. She wrote that he didn't try to fix her or her mom, and that made her feel calm. Caleb felt his chest tighten as he read those words, understanding the responsibility they carried. This wasn't affection earned, it was trust given. Later that evening, Caleb met Hannah outside the hospital without planning to. They stood together in the cold, the city moving around them, neither rushing to speak first. Hannah didn't apologize for the letter, and Caleb didn't thank her for it, because neither felt appropriate. They acknowledged instead that something essential had been shared. That mutual recognition felt like a door opening, not fully, but enough. Hannah told him she wasn't ready to define anything or promise outcomes, and Caleb didn't ask her to. He told her that staying present had become a choice he wanted to keep making, even when it felt uncertain. There was no dramatic agreement, just an understanding that the direction mattered more than the destination. Lucy watched them from inside, her face pressed against the glass, smiling quietly. The moment belonged to all three of them, even without words. As they parted that night, Caleb realized the Reviravolta wasn't about what he'd learned about Hannah or Lucy. It was about what he'd learned about himself, and the way he had avoided staying when things felt undefined. Kindness, he understood now, wasn't a gesture, but a commitment to presence over control. That realization changed the shape of his future without forcing it into certainty, and it left one final question open, waiting to be answered through choice rather than fear. The months that followed did not transform Caleb's life overnight, but they reshaped the rhythm of it in ways he could feel every day. He continued visiting the hospital, not as a benefactor or a guest, but as someone who belonged in the routine of that place. Lucy grew used to seeing him in the hallways, sometimes waving, sometimes simply sitting beside him while drawing. Hannah allowed the connection to exist without forcing it into definitions, trusting actions more than promises. That quiet continuity became the foundation of something stable. Caleb stopped measuring his presence by impact or outcome, and began measuring it by consistency. He showed up when he said he would, left when it was time to leave, and learned to respect the space between closeness and distance. Hannah noticed the difference, especially in the absence of pressure or expectation. There were no grand gestures, no sudden declarations, no attempts to accelerate what was forming naturally. That restraint built a sense of safety that words never could. Lucy thrived within that stability, no longer questioning whether people would disappear without explanation. She talked openly about her feelings, confident that someone would listen without dismissing or correcting her. Hannah watched this change carefully, recognizing how much of her own guardedness had shaped her daughter's fears. Seeing Lucy trust again required Hannah to confront parts of herself she had kept closed for years. Healing, she realized, was rarely loud or dramatic. Caleb's past life remained present, but no longer dominant, existing quietly alongside his new priorities. He didn't reject success or ambition, but he stopped letting them define his worth or direction. The man who once avoided staying now chose presence, even when it felt inconvenient or unclear. This shift didn't feel heroic or sacrificial, only necessary. It felt like returning to something he had lost along the way. One evening, back at the same restaurant months later, Caleb noticed a familiar table by the window. This time, no one was waiting alone, and no chair stood empty. Lucy talked animatedly while Hannah listened, occasionally glancing at Caleb with a soft, knowing expression. There was no ceremony to the moment, only recognition of how far they had come. The past no longer carried weight, only context. Caleb didn't think about the blind date that had ended abruptly, or the assumptions that once defined him. What mattered now was the life unfolding in small, ordinary ways that felt unexpectedly full. He understood that kindness had not fixed everything, but it had opened space for growth and connection. That space allowed people to choose one another freely without obligation or fear, and that freedom made all the difference. As the night ended, Lucy reminded Caleb of her rule about Christmas and empty chairs, smiling like it was obvious. Hannah laughed softly, acknowledging how much that simple belief had changed all of them. Caleb felt gratitude settle in, quiet and steady, without the need for explanation. Some transformations happened not through dramatic moments, but through sustained care. This was one of them. The story did not conclude with certainty or final answers, but with something stronger. It ended with trust rebuilt, presence chosen, and bonds formed through everyday kindness. Caleb understood now that healing did not require fixing the past, only committing to the present. The future remained open, shaped by choices rather than fear, and for the first time in a long while, that openness felt like home. Thanks for listening. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories that remind us that goodness is still alive in the world. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. See you in the next story.